Body. Urban Forestry Commission meeting, and we're going to start with public comments.
Okay, yeah, I know that we had a few people sign up for public comments. I'll talk to you too. If there's anyone who is attending as a community member, you can raise your hand on Zoom to indicate you'd like to provide a public comment. All right, we've got one. Albert, I'm going to bring you into the meeting so you can share.
Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone.
Albert, yeah, feel free.
Yeah, I am.
Are you on mute or?
Just like you.
It's coming through there, not through the.
Is he talking?
He is.
1 second, we can't hear you.
Oh.
We're trying to fix the audio.
I'm not sure how to fix that.
Hello.
That's me.
This is Albert speaking.
I can hear Albert. Can others hear Albert?
Not hearing any of the commissioners well, or any of the folks on Zoom.
Yeah,
so
we're working on
give
this.
us a second.
Sorry, folks.
Technology.
Yeah. No, we're already muted.
I'll try again. Hi.
Oh. Yeah. Mute the volume on your laptops.
Right.
Sorry, folks. The speaker system in the room does not appear to be working for us right now.
I'll try again. Hi.
Microphone and up thing.
It gets me every time too. Later today, I have to figure out.
I could sign my testimony. No, that's probably not a great joke, but an offering for the future. How about now?
It's not you, Albert.
It's not you,
this
yeah.
room.
It's probably here.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can hear Albert fine on Zoom. So
Okay. I'm gonna go down to the front desk and ask if there's someone that can help us because I'm not
Okay.
sure how to fix this.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for hearing me, Roberta.
We're requesting
good to hear you.
assistance. Should we just move on to the next agenda item? Let's see while we're waiting for this. And then, sorry, Albert, about the delay.
Okay.
But we're just gonna quickly do the meeting minutes while we're trying to get audio help. And then go back to your public comment, okay? So let's see, did folks have any adds or changes with the meeting minutes? Okay. And I don't actually even see, were they actually attached?
Yeah, they were attached to the announcement of this meeting.
Okay, to the announcement. Okay, great. Okay, any proposal to approve? Yes, go ahead.
Geez, I'm trying to, I move that we accept the minutes, the November 21st minutes as written.
Okay, any second?
I can second.
There we go.
Thanks, Melinda.
Yay.
Figured it out.
All in favor? Okay, any noes? Any abstentions? Okay, great. How are we doing there?
I think we got it
Okay,
fixed.
cool.
Albert, if you want to try and give your public comment again, I think we've got the audio issues figured out.
Okay. How's that sound?
Yep, that's
Great.
better. Thank you.
Okay, sure.
Brian, I got the minutes.
Well, my public comment, I'll just keep it brief this morning. I know you guys are probably tired of hearing me say this. I seem to be doing it on a pretty regular basis to anyone who listened to me, but the basic gist of my testimony is plant more trees. Since we canceled the city's contract with Friends of Trees, we've now missed three tree planting seasons. We seem to be in the midst of the third one right now. The city should immediately re-up with Friends of Trees and get back to community-supported tree planting. Trees help reduce stormwater runoff, air pollution, and the urban heat island effect, and provide a host of other benefits. The Parks Department has its hands full and does not seem to be prioritizing this important component. We don't have time to waste. Let's get tree planting going again. And let me get back to looking at you. Yeah, I feel like urban forestry is doing, a great job of staffing up and getting ready to spend the millions of dollars that are coming down the pike. But doesn't seem to be a reason to me to not get started now. Really, literally now. I mean, I'm just amazed that given the emergency of climate change, we're not planting trees like in a desperate fashion. We could even just be planting the trees that have died, that Friends of Trees planted 3 years ago, and 2 years, and 4 years ago, and 5 years ago, and that would be plenty to make Albert happy. And what is really life about around here? It's making me happy. Anyway, I know that it's a complicated situation, but somehow we were able to do it for 20 years, without fail. And I just miss the community aspect of it. I miss the way that Friends of Trees rallied to get people to plant trees together, the knowledge of how to plant a tree, all these young kids coming together and cross-pollinating with each other, kids from different neighborhoods, from different schools, parents coming out. It was just a really beautiful thing. And we don't have a lot of activities like that in our society, and this is one. So I really hope that you all consider getting some money to Friends of Trees sooner rather than later. There's no reason for us to wait until 2025 to start planting in earnest. We really should be getting to this a lot quicker. And I hope that you'll consider that comment in earnest. Thank you.
Thank you. Comments from staff or commissioners?
Sure. Thanks for the comment, Albert. This is Jen Kyra. I'm the city forester. I'm pleased to be able to clarify that there have been no missed planting seasons. Urban Forestry, with many partners, has been planting trees consistently and increasingly for years. This season, we are planting 3,500 trees. That'll be in streets, yards, schools, and parks with volunteers, with contractors, and with staff. And that's more than ever before planted by the city. We have various programs that are working on that and have been for years now too. The Free Street Tree Planting Program, the Yard Tree Giveaway Program, the Learning Landscapes Program. And many of these are with volunteers and include educational components. I'll put links for all of those in the chat so you all can see them. And also just last week, there was some nice media coverage from Oregon Live and Katu of one of our recent Learning Landscapes plantings with school children. And that included a curriculum component to teach about trees and their importance and how people can support them.
See Roberta.
Commissioner Jortner.
Yeah, thanks. So question for Jen Cairo, I guess. I hear all the things that are going on and those are really great. And I'm just curious if you could just recap for the new commissioners and for me too, actually, the newer commissioners, why would the a contract with Friends of Trees that would also be doing additional volunteer planting be not complementary to the work that the city is doing, given the the capacity issues and the needs and so forth. I mean, and I know PSEP is kind of coming up as well, so there's a whole nother ramp up process going on. But it does strike me that that those needn't necessarily be mutually exclusive. And for those that don't know the history, it might be helpful to sort of share how it is that how that relationship with Friends of Trees changed and why the city would not re-engage in a. I think the city is engaged to some extent with Friends of Trees and collaborating with Friends of Trees on a number of grants as well through the federal funding. So just maybe a little bit, why not both and kind of thing.
It is both and. Thanks for asking the question. And the Friends of Trees contract with the city expired, as all contracts do. Friends of Trees chose not to apply again for that contract. However, Friends of Trees and many other community groups have been very involved in the Portland Clean Energy Fund Equitable Tree Canopy Initiative, which y'all had an update on just recently. And also the recent Inflation Reduction Act funding that many 8 or 9 different groups in the Portland area applied for funding through the Inflation Reduction Act. Those funds were received, less than we applied for, but still $12 million for tree planting and education and community engagement. And that coalition, of which Urban Forestry is a member, is led by Friends of Trees. And we helped, as did others, file the application for that successful grant. So those are some illustrations, Roberta, to respond to your question. Sorry, Commissioner Jortner.
Okay, any other questions or thoughts on that? Move on to the city forester report.
Okay.
City forester Kyra.
Thank you, Chair Feldstein. I have 7 items for y'all today. First up is a reminder that as commissioners, y'all are required to give notice if you're going to be absent from a commission meeting. So if you're not able to attend a meeting, that's okay. You can miss a few, but please email Brian in advance so that we know who will be here. And given quorum needs, when votes need to be made, as far in advance as possible would really be appreciated. Second item, our team has developed a new urban forest management and planning tool called the Tree Canopy Explorer. It's on our website and it's available for anyone's use. It was created, in fact, for everyone to use. And when I'm done, I'll put that link in the chat for you to see. But with it, you can see where tree canopy in the city of Portland is, where it isn't, and where it could yet be planted in the future. And you can look at that type of information at very different scales and across political boundaries. So when I put it in the chat, I'd ask that you take a look at it at some point when you have time, play around in there, maybe look at your neighborhood or other neighborhoods you're interested in. And please spread the word that that tool is available for anyone to use with tree interested folks that you know. Thank you to Urban Forestry CJ Kanowski and Jeff Ramsey for creating that new resource. And I know that an example of how it's being used, our own planning team in the Parks Bureau, who design park improvements, redevelopments, also work on property acquisition, are using the tool. And we have a special training coming up for that team to get them really acquainted with its capacity. Third item, I wanted to give you an update on the Portland Urban Forest Plan project. We had our first technical advisory committee meeting recently and also completed recruitment for the community advisory committee and are preparing for the first meeting of the community advisory committee, which will happen in January. There were over 60 applicants for the community advisory committee, which is really exciting. We're pleased with the diversity of the backgrounds, experiences, and identities of the folks that we have on the community advisory committee. Thanks to all of you who helped spread the word about the need to have a great, robust community advisory committee. We're also continuing to interview staff about urban forest management strengths, challenges, and opportunities. And currently the consultants are reviewing permit data and trends in canopy coverage to help us better understand where canopy change is occurring and why. Fourth item the Oregon Department of Forestry received $26.6 million in, federal Inflation Reduction Act funds to grant out across the state for things community and urban forest related. So earlier today, I mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act. This is in effect a second round of those Inflation Reduction Act funds being allocated across the country. And if you remember, there's a total of $1.5 billion in that Inflation Reduction Act, which is unprecedented funding from the federal level for things urban forest related. So $10 million of the $26.6 million that ODF has received will be devoted specifically to federally recognized tribes and tribal organizations. And another $12.5 million will be available to all eligible entities in the state of Oregon. Those include local governments, other tribe and tribal organizations, nonprofits. Really the only criterion beyond that is all of those entities who wish to apply have to be registered with the federal government's contracting system. The grants will range from $10,000 to $1 million. And proposals are due by March 21st, 2024, so in a couple months. I'm gonna put the frequently asked questions from the Oregon Department of Forestry about this new grant opportunity in the chat for y'all when I'm done. And again, I'd ask you to share that around broadly with organizations and other folks that might be interested in accessing those funds. My fifth item is a city update. The Bureau of Development Services, BDS, is currently in the process of laying off about 65 staff, and there may be more yet to come. This is because the Bureau of Development Services is funded by property development permitting fees, and development activity has been down for some time in the city. It's also projected to remain low for at least 24 months. That means BDS's funding is reduced, their revenue is reduced. Their largest cost, of course, as with all the city bureaus, is to pay for folks to do their work. And so that's why they have to lay some people off. This means in effect that 2 urban forestry members have also lost their positions because of the BDS layoffs. This is due to a process in certain union contracts called bumping, where when a position is cut, the least senior person in that classification, broad job description, is released regardless of whether they are in the reduced service area. And of course, it has nothing to do with the quality of that person's work. It's really just about seniority and a kind of a cascading effect. The same classifications can appear across many different work groups and bureaus. We see the same classifications often in different service areas. In the current BDS reductions, this means that while 2 current urban forestry team members no longer have their positions, folks from other bureaus who have been bumped will bump into urban forestry. So in effect, we'll have the same number of people, just different people. I wanted to share this with you because, of course, this is very impactful to individuals and to their jobs. It's impactful to morale for our teams across the city service, especially for Bureau of Development Services, and many bureaus, not just parks and urban forestry, are affected. I also wanted to let you know that the Bureau of Transportation has identified a significant funding gap, and we await information on next steps there. Also, please know that the city's Bureau of Human Resources is working to help people who have been laid off from their positions identify other city roles that they might be eligible to apply for. And there is an employee assistance program that includes counseling, career and financial advice that's available to all city employees. On to the 6th item. I have one after this one. This one's a little long. It's some Portland Clean Energy Fund updates. Last week, Commissioner Rubio and the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability announced that an unanticipated additional $540 million in PSEF revenue is expected over the next 5 years. And they announced how those new funds will be used. I will put the press release for this in the chat. There's quite a lot of information in it that I can't do justice to, and it would take a long time. But I wanted to highlight a few elements of that. The funds provide some immediate budget relief and future protection for the city's general fund. And of course, they're being used to support the Clean Energy Fund goals. In the first round of awards that were announced in that press release, the Forestry Arborist Trainee Program is going to be funded. It's a program we've been working on for some time to have a real entry-level career opportunity to help improve and diversify our workforce in our arborist classification. And that'll be a paid position with full city benefits. It's a technical workforce development program also. And then also that announcement referenced a second upcoming set of uses for the funds. Those are being developed now as part of the budget development process for the new fiscal year, which starts July 1st. And that announcement included $100 million for tree protection and maintenance over 5 years. $100 million for tree protection and maintenance over 5 years. I know Bruce is taking diligent notes. This specifically includes new funds for the city to maintain street trees. I'm going to say that again because this is a really exciting moment. That includes new funds for the city to maintain street trees. City maintenance of street trees has not been the city's policy. Instead, that's been the responsibility given to adjacent property owners. Most, if not nearly all, of American cities of Portland size or larger maintain street trees. They do not require their adjacent property owners to do that. And we know our policy in Portland is a known burden on property owners, especially those experiencing low income, a barrier to tree planting and tree care, and has helped perpetuate the inequitable distribution of trees in Portland. So these new funds are really exciting. This is a huge opportunity for positive impact on our forest canopy, tree preservation and longevity, and also equity and environmental justice in the city. Of course, we will be updating you going forward. We don't know any of the details quite yet. As I said, it was a press release that came out last week. Meantime, we're really eager and excited to get going on this important work. The final thing I have for you is kind of a preview of one of the agenda items you'll have today. The agenda includes information on our new proactive park tree maintenance or park care program. And that'll be presented by our tree maintenance operations manager, Paul Anderson, and our park tree maintenance coordinator, Joel Smith. And I wanted to point that out because this is in response, of course, to a request that you all have had to hear more about that program. And I wanted to let you know also of the other requests that we're tracking for future commission agendas. Those include accounting for trees as capital assets, urban forest and potable and wastewater infrastructure policies. So where the bureaus overlap, new heritage tree designations and the heritage tree program. There'll also be an update on the natural resources service area, which is part of the larger city government transition project. I think that's actually tentatively on the agenda for next month. And also we will be bringing a tree planting programs update. That concludes my report. If anyone has any questions, I'll be happy to answer them, or if anyone wants to go woohoo because of street tree maintenance, that's fine too.
This is Bruce, for those of you who are online and can't see us at the table. I have 2 questions. Is it possible to put somewhere that we can access who is on the Community Advisory Committee for the Portland Urban Forest Management Plan? Great. And the second question, with the layoffs at BDS and the bumping that is part of the union contracts, and the likelihood that there will be non-forestry people doing forestry evaluations, is there some way, in case some of us wanted to track the shall we say, less than stellar results that may come from having people who know nothing about trees evaluating the trees on site, how they fit into development. Is there any way we can track those in case there are people in the community who want to say this is a travesty? Or to, excuse me, let me reword this. They can point out some inconsistencies that might be correctable.
Good question. Thank you, Commissioner Nelson. I'm thinking about the answer here. So first, the two positions that were bumped, we have a wide variety of different positions and roles in urban forestry. Some of them, many, rely on specific tree technical expertise and deep experience, like tree inspectors or Joel's job, which you're gonna hear more about in a little bit. Not all of them are like that. The two positions that we've seen bumping in are not as, it's not as necessary in those positions to have technical tree and arboriculture and urban forest management expertise. So know that first. And we train people and we do performance management with all of our staff. So one of the responsibilities that we have is to support folks and make sure in their new roles they're able to do that work. And there are many structured ways that we do that every day. So my summary is, I don't think you'll see those types of outcomes from those two positions, but I appreciate the question.
Okay, you have more confidence than I do, but thank you for the answer.
Well, you know that we have a lot of folks on our team and we all work together every day. And so these are the types of things that we navigate, I think, pretty successfully, regularly, so. I just know more of the details.
Commissioner Jordan?
Yeah, great. I do want to say woohoo. I think that it's very, very exciting, the news about the money for tree maintenance in particular. This commission's been working on that issue on and off for almost a decade, at least. And so that's really exciting. And my understanding is it still needs to go through the PSEF committee and city council to kind of solidify those allocations. And do you know anything about the timeline right now? And I think it would be really helpful if staff would keep the commission updated on the timeline, because at the right moment, I'm hoping the commission will, submit correspondence to those parties and or testify on behalf of the proposal. So
Yes.
wondering about timing, I guess.
Yeah, we don't have a lot of detail on that yet, but you're correct, I believe, Commissioner Jortner, that this will be for the PSEF Advisory Committee to work on as a next step, January, February?
It'll be, I believe it's gonna be at their January meeting. They'll be
Okay.
talking about all of the funding that was just announced.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you know, Brian just said that we think that will be at their January meeting. Do we know when that is vis-a-vis the commission meeting?
I can look it up and see if it's on their website.
Brian's gonna look it up. We will, yes, we will share whatever information we have about that meeting, date, time, that kind of thing with all of you, at least via email if we can't find it right now.
Their next meeting is January 18th, which is the same day as the UFC meeting, actually. It's from 6 to 8 p.m. I'll put that in the chat.
Thank you.
Okay, I think I'm gonna move us on because,
Did I go too long?
no, perfect, okay, absolutely perfect. Yeah, so Parks Levy, here to report.
Share my presentation from Zoom.
And I'll say, welcome Claire Flynn.
Yeah.
Claire leads our Parks Levy program, including a lot of tracking, performance and reporting.
Right. Start my video here for people online. Okay, so good morning, everyone. Like Jen said, my name is Claire Flynn. I'm the levy coordinator for Portland Parks and Recreation. My presentation today is gonna just cover fiscal year 22-23 annual report and the materials that you received as part of kind of the overview. We presented the report to City Council last week and it was accepted unanimously. So this is just kind of sharing some of the outcomes of that report, where it intersects with the work of urban forestry, and just giving a little overview and opportunity for questions and discussion. So a brief overview of the Parks Levy. In November 2020, Portland voters approved the Parks Local Option Levy, really to ensure that we can operate the park system and the programs that provide recreation for all, and it also help conserve parks, nature, trees, and clean water. This is a 5-year operating levy, which is enabling us to maintain and improve operational but not capital services. It supports about 1/3 of the Bureau's operating funding. For urban forestry, the Parks Levy is helping support and expand operations. And with Parks Levy support, urban forestry has added more than 20 or so positions focused on supporting tree maintenance and urban forestry operations. And this added capacity is helping to care more holistically for park and natural area trees. So year 2 of the Parks Levy, which this report covers, built on the foundations laid in year 1, and progress has been made on the 15 commitments that we're using to track kind of success and progress. And those are the 15 commitments that were listed in the voter pamphlet that voters saw and approved. So the Bureau's report and executive summary, as well as we have our own Parks Levy Oversight Committee who do their own report, cover fiscal year 22-23, and share key actions taken this past fiscal year to support recreation for all, protect and grow nature, community partnerships, which you can see here. So the report covers key actions, financials, performance measures, and data for those 15 commitments that were included in the ballot title and explanatory statement. Throughout the report and this presentation, we include interviews and stories of staff and partners and participants to really show the impact of the Parks Levy. And today I'll share kind of some key highlights on how the Parks Levy is helping deliver on the 15 commitments made. I'm going to kind of skim briefly through recreation for all, but the core of what you all be interested in is under protect and grow nature and community partnerships. So then at the top of each of these next slides, we have the commitment language the voters saw. So the Bureau was successful in preventing further cuts and closures to ongoing recreation programs and operating facilities in year 2. The Parks Levy kind of continues to provide revenue support to help stabilize the parks budget, things like our summer free-for-all program and operating kind of day-to-day programs at community centers, things like that were supported by the levy. And then we included a story from the co-founders of the Black Swimming Initiative who share the impact of Parks Levy funded partnerships, which is helping to provide swim lessons and water safety courses. We also use Parks Levy funding to deliver on a variety of recreation programs, so providing swim lessons, camps and classes, and other popular programming. And there were some challenges in hiring swim instructors, but we were able to still increase the number of swim lesson participants and hours worked by swim instructors. Overall, total estimated attendance increased, and we served free meals throughout the year to youth and families through various programming. The Access Pass was introduced in fall 2022, and through this, we provided $3 million in financial assistance to over 15,000 unique users. This is significantly more than the Bureau has been able to provide in the past, and was a big step towards reducing costs of barrier. This commitment also ties a little bit to some things that urban forestry is doing, specifically moving forward and expanding this commitment by promoting equity in tree permitting and waiving permit fees for low-income applicants. We interviewed some recreation staff who help provide free programming in partnership with Home Forward. So free programming is also a way that we remove financial barriers. So now we're kind of getting into the protect and grow nature aspect of this. And with more than 11,000 acres of land that include 8,000 acres of natural area, our maintenance and enhancement of natural features is essential to climate resilience, protecting water quality and habitat, and ensuring ecological health in urban areas. So in our natural stewardship team, we added a stewardship coordinator position to the soft surface trails team to engage with volunteer groups that have a more advanced level of understanding around trails. And we also expanded trail signage and improved trails in various parks. The Parks Levy also allowed for hiring a full-time ongoing coordinator role focused on supporting Forest Park and the Renew Forest Park program to manage and improve the unmet ecological infrastructure and access needs of Forest Park. We interviewed a natural area stewardship volunteer who gives back by volunteering to create natural areas and habitat for local plants, animals to get outside and learn new skills. In year 2, we also increased the number of environmental education participants from the previous year and continue to work to engage and provide services to communities of color and children experiencing poverty, including expanding culturally specific and bilingual nature education programming. We interviewed 2 youth who shared their experiences with the Youth Conservation Crew program, connecting to the outdoors and developing job skills. A large portion of Parks Levy funding was also spent on enhancing parks maintenance and cleaning parks. To date, the Parks Levy has helped create over 80 new maintenance positions that will help with operational parks maintenance, including emptying trash cans, cleaning and checking restrooms, preventative maintenance, repairs, and more. The increase that we see in preventative work orders means that work is being done more proactively, which helps limit declines in asset conditions and keeps facilities open to the public. Here's the meat of it for you. The benefits, as you know, of Portland's tree canopy are not distributed equally, with less tree canopy east of the Willamette. Parks Levy funding is helping increase holistic care for park trees. For the first time ever, thanks to the Parks Levy, PPNR has the funding to care for park trees beyond just emergency maintenance. This is something we highlighted in the report. The Parks Levy funds really complement the additional investments that you all were just discussing, like the significant investment from PSEF to support urban forestry expenses. We continue to engage Portlanders in tree planting, educational events, and tree-related outreach. So in this section, we highlighted a story from a Home Forward property manager at the Tamarack Apartments who hosted a planting event in partnership with Urban Forestry that engaged residents in tree planting and education. And they noted everyone who participated in the tree planting event, from Tamarack residents to community members to volunteers, left that day feeling a greater sense of connection. We also showcased urban forestry specific performance measures that showed progress and increases in fiscal year 22-23. PPNR increased trees planted, planting almost 2,400 trees in priority neighborhoods where canopy levels are lowest and where there are large inequities in urban canopy relative to race and income. More trees were planted overall, with nearly 3,500 trees planted total. Arborist hours dedicated to park trees also increased. While variable with storm and emergency management needs, the overall trend is reflective of more arborist time being spent on that holistic park tree maintenance that the Parks Levy is supporting. In fiscal year 22-23, the Parks Levy funding also helped support the development of a new volunteer management software and continued moving forward a previous investment to upgrade the maintenance work order system. Additional internal efficiencies that we highlighted in the report included an urban forestry web app that is an internal method to improve communication among work groups, makes the decision-making process around tree planting much easier, and will allow for proactive collaboration with other PPNR teams to grow Portland's urban forest. For community partnerships, there are 2 main elements of this commitment, a community oversight committee and a future performance audit. In fiscal year 22-23, we were continued to be advised by the Parks Levy Oversight Committee, and their report was presented in tandem with the Bureau's report. The Oversight Committee report was found that parks adhered to ballot language and recommended continued use of those 15 commitments to refine and show success. And then they also recommended that we refine performance measures to speak to success kind of beyond just adherence to ballot language. For fiscal accountability, the committee encouraged the Bureau to continue tracking the use of our leverage funding model, which is kind of a blended funding of Parks Levy and General Fund, to continue to track that at multiple levels, so commitment, service area and work group, and then line item. And then finally, they found the Bureau to be transparent and recommended enhanced transparency by sharing additional context for performance measures and speaking to service level impacts with and without the Parks Levy. In terms of an audit, to date, we've established kind of our internal quality checks and controls with the finance team, and we're preparing to conduct the audit during year 3 of the Parks Levy, which, as you see, is required by the ballot language. This commitment to prioritize services for communities of color and households experiencing poverty is very closely tied to our overall theme of centering equity, and is really about kind of the how we do this work. So Parks Levy Fund supported things like community engagement, working with community partners and organizations who serve populations that PPNR is centering. Our community partnership program has continued to evolve and expand, and granted funds to additional partner agencies, and in year 2 served almost 3,500 youth. We interviewed the executive director of People of Color Outdoors, who receives community partnership program funding, and with that funding, her organization can host more kids and expand programming to additional seasons. The Bureau successfully delivered Parks and Recreation services to a wide variety of users and implemented initiatives like early registration, our community partnership program, grants, and work order prioritization. This year, kind of based on Oversight Committee feedback, we did include workforce diversity and demographic measures related to the Parks Levy, particularly in showing how PPNR-centered communities can see themselves in PPNR's workforce. This is a very high-level summary of Parks Levy funding spent in year 2. The report itself, and especially in the appendices, break down the spending further by the 15 commitments and list out expenses by service area and work group, where you can track kind of, even down to like the urban forestry team that's doing the work. At the bottom total there, you can see that the Parks Levy resources were able to bolster additional operating resources. Of the $74.22 million total spent on services and activities, after kind of fee adjustments have been made, Parks Levy funding supported about $25.5 million of that spending. Additionally, per City Council's direction in the ballot referral, we're required to reimburse the Portless Children Levy for the amount of compression impact that the Children's Levy, or that the Parks Levy caused the Children's Levy. So with that, the total spending of the Parks Levy this year was $25.82 million. This does leave a balance of about $22.17 million in the fiscal year to be rolled over to be spent in future years of Parks Levy eligible service delivery. And this underspending is a result of kind of continued ramping up, continued bringing on of new materials and supplies to facilitate additional capacity. So while the second year of the Parks Levy saw underspending, we do anticipate that by year 3, we won't see underspending as we continue to ramp up, and that by year 5, expenditures will really outweigh revenues. And retaining this initial underspending is critical to ensuring full service delivery over the life of the Parks Levy. So it's a lot of information, but hopefully you've had a chance to kind of look at the reports, and if not, they're available online, and I'm happy to answer any questions about kind of the report, what we've shared this year, and kind of upcoming Parks Levy successes.
In my reading of the documents, this is Bruce, is there a different group that is for the Oversight Committee? It seems strange to me that there's a group for this particular one, and then there seemed like there was another group for next year. Is that the normal process?
Yeah, so just the way that the timing of the committee worked out. So the committee serves like the fiscal year. And so basically They served 2-year terms. We had the first group come in, they served during year 1 and year 2, but their term ended in July. And then we brought on new members. And so the new members were the ones who actually reviewed the report and provided feedback on the report. And there were 2 members of the 5 who stayed on. So there was some continuity there in terms of seeing it happen in real time and then actually reviewing the report as well.
And another comment. Parks, since urban forestry is part of Parks and Recreation, the acreage that you list that Portland Parks and Recreation oversees could technically include where street trees are. And so you're really underrepresenting the acreage that Parks and Recreation is responsible for. If Parks and Recreation values having urban forestry as part of it, and yet it seems like in this particular report, there's minimal recognition of that acreage. And I know it's splitting hairs, but in a way it's not. If you can't say you manage the right of way without recognizing that's part of your acreage. So I'm throwing it out there.
Yeah, Jen.
Thank you, Commissioner Nelson. There are 4.2 million trees in Portland's urban forest, and Parks and Recreation's urban forestry program has a significant role with all of them. There are 1.2 million trees on parks properties. That is only a portion of the 4.2 million, most of which are actually on private property. Urban forestry also has a role. So I appreciate you making that comment. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll say, just in terms of the street tree, I think, and this was before my time, but when they were going out for the parks levy, they pulled the levy, including street trees and not including. So for this report, because it kind of captures like a subset of parks kind of work, it doesn't include the street tree information. But I think, hearing about the PSEF stuff and the additional support there, I think our urban forestry team is doing a great job of kind of leveraging these different resources and where can we use parks levy funding to maximize kind of the impact there and dip into PSEF or where the parks levy isn't covering. So.
Thank you.
Commissioner Jordan?
Yes, thanks for that presentation. I appreciate it. Took a quick look at the Oversight Committee report, and I think it was notable for this group to know that under the ballot measure, adherence to ballot measure intent or direction, that the report was very succinct and they had very, a handful of recommendations under each of their major categories. Under the ballot measure adherence, there was a bullet specific to increased investment in tree canopy, tree planting, and tree maintenance, and a recognition of climate change as being really important. And I was curious to the presenter, it jumped out at me that the areas where the Oversight Committee chose to point out things like underspending or capital maintenance needs and some other areas where sort of like we can keep doing better. I was curious, why do you think that tree canopy investment popped out to this group, and what kind of discussion took place around that?
Yeah, it's been really interesting. There are a few members on the committee who have a very strong interest in tree canopy and specifically tree planting. And so Jen's come a few times to our meetings to talk about kind of what urban forestry goals are, where we're seeing progress, where additional investment is needed. And so I think that's definitely reflected in their report in terms of their individual interests and the kind of the push that they see, like where the Parks Levy can make that impact in those interests. And so, I think also, and Todd will talk about this in a little bit, there's a lot of support for tree canopy and kind of the impact of that on mitigating climate change. And so I think that's very reflective of that. And we kind of let their interest drive a lot of discussion in where they see the Parks Levy impact being made.
Thank you.
Questions or thoughts? Commissioners? So, you use the term maintenance throughout the report, but my understanding is that that doesn't include any kind of capital expenditure, and it just might be confusing to the public, especially if we're gonna be going forward and asking for big money for the big maintenance with the big M. So anyway, I think it's important to kind of say what is that's included in this, and
Definitely,
it
yeah.
should be interesting to know why capital was excluded from this initial request. I guess it probably would have overwhelmed
Yeah,
the dollar amount
and I
that
don't know,
was
Todd,
being
if you can
requested,
speak to
but-
kind of like where the line and distinction is drawn for capital versus like day-to-day maintenance. But I
Sure.
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so for kind of, this is an operating levy, does not include eligibility for capital expenditures. Levies can be scoped to have that to be included. This one does not. As you all know, like just on kind of the gray hard infrastructure, we've got, $600 million worth of deferred maintenance, plus throw the green infrastructure on top of that, that number goes higher. And so I think based on the question, we kind of have two problems. Sustainable Future basically has been kind of generally scoping that we needed an additional about $50 million of operating funds, of which the Parks Levy is largely addressing. And then we need another $50 million a year to address major maintenance going forward. And so when you get into kind of Oregon tax, how tax measures are assessed on the property owners, capital bonds is a very efficient way to raise public funds for public financing of capital measures that does not have compression. And that means we have some odd tax laws. You're not tracking all this in Oregon about where taxes on a private property owner only can go up about 3% every year. And then they get capped off depending on how much is being collected, but bonds don't get that, what we call compression. And so that's outside of the compression rules. And so the Parks Levy does have compression on it. And so you really want to collect from a public finance perspective, you want to collect your operating funds on a Parks Levy, and you want to collect any capital needs on a bond. That's the most efficient, kind of fair way to do it from a public financing perspective. We could probably spend a lot of time talking about that if you want.
Yeah. Good to know. Yeah. Great. I'm gonna move us on since we're,
Thank you all.
thank you. That was great.
Thank you, Claire.
Excellent. So we're now up to the Sustainable Future polling update. Sarah,
Actually gonna
I'm-
be Todd.
you're
Yeah.
doing it.
Yeah,
It's
sorry
me.
about that.
Yeah. Hopefully I'll do my best Sarah Huggins impression. She's very good, so do the best we can here. Share my screen. Just let me know if you can see that.
Yes.
Great. All right, good morning, everybody. My name is Todd Lofgren, Deputy Director, Portland Parks and Recreation. Thanks for taking some time to review the polling update we have today. We've done some sharing with you in the past about Sustainable Future and what we're seeing in terms of the impacts of capital assets to our growing capital maintenance backlog that I just talked about. And we've done some polling to refresh our understanding where there might be voter support for future potential funding measures. That's something we do periodically. In October and November, under Commissioner Dan Ryan's direction, we worked with other city council offices to gain interest in any joint polling questions to pursue. Commissioner Gonzalez's office expressed interest, and so we worked with Commissioner Gonzalez's office and Portland Fire and Rescue to include some questions in this polling that we'll share with you today about fire and rescue services and wildfire prevention as well. The poll was conducted in mid-November, and we'll go through the results here. I'll try to get through this kind of quickly, and then I think we've got some time for some Q&A. Jen, and maybe you can help me on time checks. Not sure how much time we have. So the polling consultant, FM3, did our polling. They also did our polling in 2020, prior to the referral of the Parks Levy. They do really high quality work. They also worked with Metro on their levy polling, and it was a poll utilizing both phone and online options. The levy structure was a dual sample survey. So half the survey respondents were asked questions about support for a bond, and the other half were asked questions about a levy, and the structure was the same for both. First, they were asked an initial question to gauge support. This was a structured question for people to see that they would see what they would see in the voters pamphlet. Then they were asked about their support for another measure on the same ballot. They received an additional explanation about the measures, similar to additional information they might receive in the summary information in the ballot language when people are sitting down to vote. And we asked each of their support if a measure had an additional cost added to it. And we also had additional fire-related service questions. And finally, we tested a variety of messaging to gauge the impact of how different messaging might impact the responses. So overall, Portlanders are pessimistic. This shouldn't be any surprise. You're following media or other polls, how they feel about the city, and that the city broadly is on the wrong track. This is consistent with questions that we've used in past polls, kind of to get the person responding to the poll kind of familiar with kind of an easy question just to get going. And this is a typical question at the beginning of many polls. This is pretty consistent kind of responses since August of 2020. Despite the general pessimism about the city, Portlanders continue to be very satisfied with the services provided by both Portland Fire and Rescue and with Portland Parks and Recreation. Over 71% of Portlanders indicated they were satisfied with services provided by the Fire Bureau. And it's possible, you know, we don't always know why people respond to these things, but it's possible that the 20% on the don't know are people maybe haven't used their services, and so they didn't have a response. It's a little different than park services because lots of people interact with parks, go to community center, have neighborhood parks, so they interact with the services. So we have less don't knows, but again, very high satisfaction rate with 75% being satisfied. And while there's been a shift since 2020, we don't really know, but in 2020, we had lots of facilities in our communities were closed, and parks were one of the places where people went. So, you know, our hypothesis is maybe we were so high then because we were just one of the few places where people could go and have a positive experience. So when it comes to a ballot measure, we first ask questions that are in the format people would see in the ballot pamphlet. $600 million bond initially gets 54% support. This is consistent with what we saw in 2020 and similar to how the levy polled in 2020, which passed at 64%. And you think, well, what, you know, why were the numbers lower, but then we got higher? Again, think about generally Portlanders are very, you'll see in this poll, are very, have high satisfaction with the services they're getting. They love nature, they love clean water, they love trees, they love their parks system, their neighborhood parks. And so we start kind of high. And then as you give them more information about what they might get out of a funding measure, normally those numbers go higher. So for a levy, support starts out quite high at 70%. So again, this is for a levy renewal. Looking at other renewals, the children's levy or the metro levy, that's consistent with what we've seen, with support for renewals being higher than the initial time when they're on the ballot. Here you can see the levy's initial polling in 2020. When asked an open-ended question why they would support, people indicated they thought it was worth the cost was affordable, that parks were critical to Portland's quality of life, and there's general support for parks. Opponents of the measure generally, they're opposed to new taxes, and with some also indicating that government waste mismanagement as a reason for opposition. And if you look at other polls that are done, this is kind of a general theme that you'll see in other polls as well in the Portland area. So next, polled respondents are given a little bit more information, like what they would see in the ballot, including some more explanation of what the funds would be used for and how much it would cost them. So you can see here that we give them the information for a $600 million bond. It would cost average property owner about $149 per year to generate that $600 million, or $12.41 per month. And then we also have the same explanation for the levy renewal. And again, because of compression and how you generate dollars, those numbers are a little different. With this additional information, additional support for a bond rises to 57%. Again, this is just for parks. And the initial support for a levy renewal rises to 76%, which is very high. So we then asked all poll participants for their priorities. Top priorities included things like fire response, wildfire prevention, water quality, and wildlife habitat. And again, I can make these slides available. We have them on our website, and you all can go through this in more time, or we can go back if people have questions. Broad majorities also supported protecting natural areas and providing access to them, preventing park and community closures. Messages that resonated less included things like graffiti removal, adding new playgrounds, and earthquake safety. And we've had some discussions in other forums when we shared this with the Parks Board. You know, and in general, our hypothesis is, you know, when you start using general terms like maintenance, or general terms maybe like graffiti, it starts to become less personal. But when you ask folks about, like, do you care about the closure of the community center that they go to? Do they care about the light poles being removed from the park that they like to go on walks from? Do they care about the closure of the playground that their kids go on playground? Then obviously the numbers go very high. And that's our general experience at parks. When we have a parks closure, neighbors and community members care a lot. The levy poll was a renewal. But for the bond, we also tested whether support shifted with smaller bond amounts. And we actually didn't see a significant shift in support for a smaller bond. And again, this is common for prospective voter behavior, as they generally vote for things that they care about. And the incremental difference between the tax amount normally doesn't sway whether someone's for or against it. Next, for the bond and levy, we tested support for a higher cost measure that includes both fire and rescue and parks and recreation. For a larger bond, we pulled $800 million, and this increased the support to 62%. So a parks only bond did less well than a parks and fire rescue bond with the information that you see here. So next, for the bond and levy, we tested support for higher amount that includes both fire rescue and parks and recreation. And you can see that, or sorry, for the levy. And you can see that it's 16 points lower when we combined fire and rescue and parks together. And part of this is because it's no longer just a renewal. So generally, the feedback we've gotten from Portland voters is when you go back to renew an existing service that's being provided without a tax increase, like the Portland Children's Levy that recently passed, there's high voter support. That's what we're seeing in this poll as well. We went back to Portland voters based on a renewal of the existing Parks Levy without increasing its cost. There's high support, but then that goes down once you start raising the rate and explain to voters that it's a different tax and it's an increased tax. So finally, we moved into sharing some different messaging to see how that impacts support. And for a bond with some additional messaging around what the funding would be used for, support for a parks bond alone increases to 58%. For a levy, support remains high. The difference between information and additional messaging is within the margin of error, so still very high for parks levy renewal. In general, messaging that receives over 40% feedback when we test for certain phrases that you see on the slide here. So over 40% is very convincing. That's what we've heard back from our pollster when you text independent messaging. And we see a lot of messaging that resonates with prospective Portland voters here. The highest messaging that everyone needs parks, perhaps now more than ever. Kids need access to recreation, preventing closures, and support for trees. For trees, messaging was around parks trees, not all trees in Portland that Parks is responsible for, as was just discussed earlier in this meeting. And that's just a messaging kind of test here. We didn't do, this is not like a policy choice that's been made. We also see messaging related to protecting nature and climate change is very high. So in conclusion, in general, voters are still pessimistic about Portland's direction of the city, but over 70% are supportive of services provided by fire and rescue and parks and recreation. And that translates into very strong support for a parks levy renewal, and also specifically for a bond that includes fire and rescue and parks and recreation getting the highest support. So kind of a next steps, and I'll stop sharing my screen here. folks have been following, there was some, sorry. Trying to stop screen. There we go. The governor shared some findings with a stakeholder group that she's been working with about not having tax increases in the city of Portland. We're trying to learn more through Commissioner Ryan and Commissioner Gonzalez's office and the mayor about what the governor's intent is around that. So we're in a kind of learning mode based on that new information. But both Commissioner Ryan and Commissioner Gonzalez have been supported to this effort to date of learning more about what Portlanders want out of the funding they provide in taxes. And we learned a lot, I think, through this poll, working with another bureau within the city, especially one where we have kind of programmatic overlap with things like wildfire and fire prevention, that there's a lot of strong support amongst prospective voters, at least for what we tested in this poll for the November 2024 election. And that's what I have to share. I have to take questions, and maybe Jen or Brian can give us like how much time we have for questions if we have enough time.
Yeah, we have about 7 minutes.
Okay, great.
Great, that was very informative. Todd, thanks so much. Any questions or thoughts?
Todd, there's one question in the chat asking for clarification if the governor's recommendation is no new taxes for businesses in the central city. Is it limited to that, or is it more broad?
We don't know.
Okay.
Still learning.
We'll be working on it, and I expect all of you, if you work and live in Portland area, you might want to get involved. It's a pretty big topic. I think there's other measures out there. For instance, Portland Public Schools, I think it was considering a measure, metro housing, considering a measure. This is not only unique to Portland Parks and Recreation issue, where we'd be interested to know what the governor's intent is.
Commissioner Nelson.
This is Bruce. I got confused in the presentation. Levy, you're just referring to the operations levy that we currently have, renewing it, and then the bond was specifically for capital projects. Is that correct?
Yeah, so bonds have to be used for capital. We did test adding Portland Fire and Rescue to the levy to see if, from an operational perspective, creating a new operational funding source for Portland Fire and Rescue with our current operating levy, whether that got the same support or more. Actually dropped it by 16 percentage points from, those over 70% for the renewal of just the parks levy as is. But then it dropped it down 16%. And I think that's typical. I don't know about that amount of drop, but typical voter behavior about a new tax. There's more scrutiny on that, where a renewal for something they've experienced and probably has had reports and oversight that, as long as it's generally on track, there's normally more support for that.
And
then
could
the
you
bond
repeat,
levies- Go ahead.
could you repeat what the taxing rate would be for the $600 million bond measure? What the rate is per $1,000 of assessed value or property value?
I don't have that right in front of me. What I have is $600 million on an annual basis for the average property owner in Portland is $149 a year.
And what's the
then-
value of the average property in Portland? I'm just trying to figure out how much it's gonna cost me.
Oh, yeah. I'll get you that information.
Okay, thank you.
Just remember, we have odd tax laws in Oregon where we're getting taxed on our assessed value, not our real market value. We, in the mid-90s, we set up a cap where 3%, property tax increases is the cap. So if you're taxed a lot in the mid-1990s, you got capped and that went forward, if a house and property was taxed as a low level, that is substantially paying less property tax than a higher income neighborhood that, you know, what was existed in 1990s. And they've both been on this 3% rise over the last couple decades. I mean, that's why we have a structural public finance problem in this state.
Thanks, Brian. I have a quick question, if there aren't others. So yeah, it's very encouraging, the findings on both, you know, the levy survey and even the bond looks pretty decent. Is this a done deal? Has a decision been made yet to go forward with both of them? Okay, not a done deal yet. And then I know there was interest in having a special service district. That was the one that we tried to get to be legally allowed, and it was nixed. But I don't recall now if there were other more stable funding sources that were still in the running, rather than, you know, chasing a levy every 5 years.
Right.
So
Maybe I'll take it as two questions, just the process of how we go from kind of where we are to getting renew or some type of ballot referral. So generally there's a community engagement process, community education process, of which the city bureau is involved with city council. And then there's a vote 90 days or more before the ballot time. So normally in July for a November ballot or January for a May ballot. On our current framework council, 3 members of council have to vote to refer it to get it on the ballot. There can be a community led ballot referral. I haven't seen that in the last couple of decades around tax measure, at least for the city of Portland. So that's the process. So when you say there's a decision, there's not a decision until there's a vote at council. And then for the other funding opportunities, we kicked off in 2019 the Sustainable Future Program. Many of you have, you know, gotten presentations about that. We've been doing due diligence on a variety of different tax and fee revenue sources for parks and recreation services, including for trees and the urban forest. In 2022 in the summer, we actually had another kind of ballot task force. We dug into those options and kind of what was coming out of that. Levies and bonds are kind of traditionally used for parks and recreation services in the state of Oregon. And every state's got its own tax laws, so you can look at other states for ideas, but at the end of the day, we have to come back here and see what our tax laws allow. Food and beverage tax, there's some parks and recreation services that get food and beverage tax in the state of Oregon, but for a variety of reasons, COVID and other things, probably have taken that off the table. Income tax was looked at. We have one of the higher income taxes in the city of Portland in the country right now. Not a lot of appetite for that. There is an idea around Parks District, which is also common around the country, but also in Oregon. Think of Tualatin Hills, Bend Parks and Rec District, others. However, in the state of Oregon, we only allow an independent governance board or the county. For us, Multnomah County would have to become the Parks District Board for the city of Portland. Don't see a lot of viability in that. So then you're back to an independent district governance board, of which is very difficult as well for a system as old as ours. We have 15% of land area. Just think of everything that urban forestry does. Would the city of Portland want to turn that over to a new governance structure? Likely not. So state of Washington changed their state laws in 2002, and both the city of Seattle and Olympia actually created a city governance parks district, of where the city council gavels in and out both as the city council and as the parks district oversight body. And so that's the type of legislation we tried to move through the last legislative session. We were unsuccessful with that. Kind of first time a concept gets to Salem, it normally fails. You have to show up and continue to work on the issue. And so we're looking forward to seeing if there might be an opportunity in 2025 to be back in Salem to see if we could get, and we were just writing it. Our idea was just for the city of Portland. It wouldn't apply to the whole state. We're open to other jurisdictions wanting to change that, but that's what we worked on. And again, that would just be a governance structure. It's a different question. Parks districts can have a variety of taxes and fees. And so a permanent rate is one thing that it can have, like any city can have a permanent rate. They don't have to have a renewal, but it doesn't have to be property tax. That's for the governance body to decide with voters. And so I know people kind of jump to like immediately, just because you have a parks district, you have a permanent rate. Those are actually two unique decisions. The first step is actually to create the governance structure of the parks district.
Very helpful. Thanks so much, Todd. I'm gonna turn us over to the next agenda item since we're a little
Great.
behind.
Thank you,
But
Todd.
thanks so much. So we can move on to proactive park tree maintenance program.
Thank you so much. And before I take the floor entirely, let me just thank the commission and the city forester for advancing that street tree maintenance program. As far as it's gotten, it's a huge accomplishment. I'm just excited to see it at least getting on the table to be discussed. So bravo. My name is Paul Anderson. I'm the Urban Forestry Operations Manager. So we're under Jen and with a great group of arborists and other folks. And we're going to talk a little bit about how some of those levy funds have been spent to better take care of our green infrastructure. First of all, I'll just give you a little context of what the team does. For the last decades, one of our main roles has been 24 hours a day, 7-day response to any emergencies in the right of way, trees that fall down the road. So there's an arborist on staff on call all the time, take care of those emergencies. Anytime a tree is removed from parks property, we have to replace it. So we do plantings in parks and establishment for 3 years to make sure those trees get a chance at life. We've been inoculating trees for disease like Dutch elm disease and a new pathogen I'll tell you a little bit about. We also maintain heritage trees within the parks and on the streets. In addition to that, all that, because of the levy, in May this year, Urban Forestry started a new program to regularly maintain park trees. So that was made possible by the levy again. The tree maintenance includes structural pruning, hazard abatement to improve tree health, removal of dead, dying, and dangerous trees to increase public safety, and also to enhance wildlife habitat, and just generally to get our big trees to live longer. Prior to that levy, we never had the funds to maintain and care for park trees and green spaces this way. The Bureau's work was limited to reactive emergency work. So we've developed a draft park tree maintenance plan, and we've started implementing it as we finalize the plan. So while we were developing this park tree maintenance plan, we looked around with various cities to try to find examples that we might work off of and found none. So the plan we have is bespoke, made just for Portland. I'm really proud of the work that Joel has done to make this plan a reality. And he's going to share with you the key features of the plan, and then we'll take some of your questions. Joel Smith has been with the Parks and Recreation for over 8 years, mostly as a tree inspector. He has 18 years of arboriculture experience, and we're thrilled to have him with us. I'm gonna let him take you through a couple of slides on what our plan includes. Over to you, Joel.
All right. So as Paul said, I'm the new Park Tree Maintenance Coordinator. It's a position that started this last February. Frank, we go to the next slide. So our past practices, we responded to emergencies, visited parks as concerns were brought forward by neighbors, park users, or other park staff. Limited resources reduced our ability to push beyond the most urgent work in each park. As we researched into other cities, we contacted quite a few and tried to focus on cities that were either in our region or had a similar size and tree population as Portland does. What we learned is that most cities have a similar form of reacting to tree concerns that we had in past years. the few cities we talked to that have proactive maintenance of their park trees lacked a really solid structure to and documentation to how they prioritize that work. Our current plan lays out guidance for where we will inspect, how often we should inspect, what the inspection will include, the types of work that we plan to complete, and how we will prioritize tree work in the parks. Due to a significant backlog of deferred maintenance, we anticipate the first few years of this effort to look significantly different than it will look in the future when we get caught up on that backlog. The first step is to understand what we are working with regarding the tree population. Fortunately, Portland already has an inventory of the trees in developed portions of our parks where we can start from. Thank you to Jeff and the tree inventory team for having already created this. And because we have this in place, the next step is to inspect each park for tree maintenance needs. Go to the next slide. Historic urban forestry staffing levels greatly restricted what tree care we can perform in parks. Recognizing the budget shortfalls, limiting our abilities to maintain parks, Portland voters approved a local option levy, which we've just been talking all about, that provides greater funding. This funding has allowed an increase in both staffing and equipment that has enabled us to begin a park tree maintenance program that far exceeds what we have been able to in the past. One of our historic issues was that park work orders, if completed, were on a schedule that was not predictable or dependable. Some of our new abilities with the levy funding have included routine inspections of park trees, regularly scheduled park tree work, more formalized prioritization of park work, increased resources for preventing tree failures, additional communication with park staff, neighbors, and park users, and increased efforts on promoting wildlife habitat. And in the picture here, we have one of our operations supervisors, Eric, explaining to Commissioner Dan Ryan some of what we look for as we inspect trees in the parks. Next slide. Tree inventory data can be used to better understand what we have for a tree population and organized tasks to be completed. This inventory, used in conjunction with the input of new data, will enable us to track what work has been completed in each park and to each tree. When looking at this map on this slide, each color is a different species of tree. Some species will have unique tree care needs and may require more frequent inspections. In Delta Park, we have ash trees that we're now treating for emerald ash borer. We have trees that we prefer to prune when they don't have leaves on them. It's a better experience for our workers, and other trees that will have other seasonal limitations. Next slide. The current draft park tree maintenance plan lays out guidance for prioritizing park work inspections and work. The inspection process, the standard of care for park trees, how the work will be monitored and tracked, and how urban forestry should interact with other city staff and the public. The trees are one component of the overall plan. The coordination with park functions, utilities, irrigation, neighbors, schools, and other park users is a significant part of the plan as well. The written plan is currently being updated to address review feedback prior to going to final editing and should be approved within the first half of 2024. Next slide. The first priority of park tree inspections is to find hazards. The tree in the photo was found on a routine inspection at the beginning of this process. During the dormant season, prior to leaf out and prior to the picnic area being heavily used in the park. So looking at the tree in this picture, you can see the significant decay and crack between the main first union of the majority of the canopy of the tree. And in the bottom left corner is one edge of a picnic table, and this area has picnic tables going in a circular fashion all around here. And after we removed this tree, I asked the crew about it, and they said that when they pulled on the portion on the right half of the picture, it just peeled in half. So it was very close to failure. We got it down before it failed on its own. Often trees like this of concern are brought to our attention by park users. This tree is an example of one that we did not have any report of anyone complaining about it or bringing it to our attention. So this was a good find on our routine inspections. As an inspection is completed, we track the date in a master list. Let's go back, sorry. So we track the date in a master list of all properties that we are responsible for. The general guide is to start with parks in underserved neighborhoods until all parks have been inspected. Once we have inspected all park properties, we will then prioritize them by the property that has gone the longest without inspection. And this will be to avoid having some parks well maintained and others neglected. After completion of tree care, we can inspect again to ensure that our standards, which are based on ANSI pruning standards and the International Society of Arboriculture best management practices, are being followed by our staff. Next slide. On the topic of what park to inspect next. Out of over 300 park properties, we have 190 developed parks, 73 natural areas, 39 community gardens, and a mix of community centers, medians, golf courses, and other properties. These properties are throughout the city in a variety of neighborhoods with varying levels of its historic maintenance. Recognizing that developed parks have tree canopy in high use areas, these areas and these properties are what we intend to focus on first. With more than half of all properties falling into this category, additional prioritization is in order. For the initial inspection, we are prioritizing historically underserved neighborhoods. So we're simultaneously trying to prioritize our developed parks and our underserved neighborhoods. So we're kind of going with the developed parks in the underserved neighborhoods first while we work through the developed parks, and we'll start that process again as we go through the lower use property types. This is a specific mechanism in the plan to provide equitable tree care throughout the city. Since starting routine inspections in February 2023, we've been able to inspect more than 150 properties. Next slide. So what tree work to complete next? Some trees are easy to make a top priority, like the one shown in this photo that was hollow, a hollow leaning tree that was on fire. Urgent safety concerns like this one continue to be dispatched to emergency crews for immediate corrections, 24 hours a day, all days of the year. For more regular tree maintenance, we look at seasonal limitations, schedule for the best season, and prioritize these items prior to the next season starting. We look at items most likely to become a hindrance, potential limb failures, infrastructure clearance, anything that is limiting the best park functions. And next we look at remaining work within the same park as one of these other higher priority items to increase efficiency of staff and equipment, so the crews are going to as few sites as possible per day to decrease travel time. We're really putting a lot of effort into having crews spend full days at parks rather than jumping from park to park to park and then circling back to the same park again shortly thereafter. Next slide. Crew time is both extremely valuable and a finite resource. Keeping the crews fully booked with work with the fewest stops per day allows for the most work to be completed with the staff and equipment resources available. Knowing about as much work as possible through proactive inspections allows for prioritization and options to pivot to other tasks as obstacles arise on the original plan. Next slide. The operations team meets at least weekly to discuss scheduling for the crews that complete the tree care activities. The intent is to optimize crew production while limiting undesirable impacts to other park uses, such as sporting events, school use, and community center access. In some cases, neighboring properties are impacted by park work. We have many trees that the canopies reach across property lines. In cases where access may be needed to neighboring properties, contact is made prior to the work taking place. With only a handful of these interactions completed this year, the initial response from neighbors has been very positive. The return interval for completing tree work will vary by tree species and park use. While it is often tempting to say that we'll prune every tree every 3 years or 5 years or another number, this can lead to an inefficient use of limited resources. Instead, we seek to have a more frequent inspection interval for gathering information that will allow the best utilization of staff and equipment resources that are available. While the current inspection rate would lead to a return interval of about 2 to 3 years for inspection, this can be modified by property or tree type to allow more frequent inspections of some areas and less frequent inspections of others. Since we have not yet completed a full inspection cycle of all properties, we're still gathering information on what we're working with and exactly how those will be organized. And now I will pass it back to Paul, who's going to tell us a little bit more about our tracking and the work we do.
Thank you, Joel. And just so everyone knows, in addition to researching the plan, doing all the coordination, Joel's the one walking around the parks, looking at all the trees and doing the work that needs to be done. So bravo to Joel for a very productive first 9 months of the job. Next slide, please. I'm going to show you this slide twice because I really like it. First time is just to note that there's 150 plus parks that have been inspected, and about a third of those have been treated. That is, a team has gone over and taken care of the trees that need to be maintained there. You'll note that there's 98 parks evaluated and 54 maintained. The 54 maintained and evaluated, so you have the two numbers together. And we're in parks today, so that number's going up. In fact, we are now in a park every single day doing maintenance, in addition to responding to emergencies, establishing trees, and dealing with interagency requests. So this is a fantastic increase, and again, kudos to those who planned this years before to make it happen. Next slide. So just to make sure everyone knows that 24-hour emergency care and response is still taking place with our increased staffing levels. Our last storm in November, we had that atmospheric river event. We had lots of calls come in. Every call was seen the day it came in, and most were resolved the same day, including a landslide up by OHSU. That had trees slide down the hill, removed the trees, PBOT bulldozed the soil out of the road, and people were able to drive again shortly thereafter. So our response to emergencies has stayed at pace, if not increased, which is good. Next slide, please. This slide shows the planting done by urban forestry operations crews, along with support from other teams in urban forestry. Back in 2016, we were planting less than 100 trees a year, replacing in the parks less than 100. That was scaled up to 200 to 230 over the next 4 years. And now we're trying to increase by 50 trees per year. So last year we planted 300 trees approximately. This year it'll be 350. We're going to try growing that by 50 trees a year until we reach 500. Because we do the establishment of trees as well, which is watering them in the summer primarily, that means it's in the future, about 2028, we'll be establishing 1,600 trees per year, because of that 3-year cycle. And that's about as many as we can conceivably establish. But we're scaling up. It's a really good thing. This is happening concurrently with the park tree maintenance. So any trees we're felling that have to come out because they're old or dangerous, they're being replaced. Next slide, please. In addition to caring for the trees, doing pruning, there are also inoculations. The Dutch elm disease inoculations has been taking place for years. In addition to that, emerald ash borer appeared in a neighboring city last year. It is going to be in Portland soon. If it is not already here, it kills every ash tree. The only way to prevent that from happening is to inoculate the trees. We are going to inoculate all the healthy large ash in parks. We did a third this year. We'll do a third next year and a third the year following, and then cycle back around. So our ash, this is a brand new program. Unfortunately, we have the resourcing and know-how to be able to jump on it before the beetles start attacking our trees here, in the parks at least. That next slide. Really important part of any new program, like the proactive maintenance of park trees, is measuring our success to see how we're doing. One of the key metrics is the geographic spread of that care, making sure that we're treating all areas of the city equally and equitably. In addition to that, a key metric is reducing hazards. We're tracking the number of hazard trees that Joel and others discover that we remove or mitigate. We're ensuring that we're equitably caring for the trees through first approaching underserved neighborhoods. What we found and what makes sense is that trees in underserved neighborhoods get less reports about problems. And so we're not responding to them because we don't know about them. Now we know about them, so we can respond quickly. Another metric of success is efficiency. Crews driving around the city, getting stuck in traffic is very unproductive. So organizing bigger blocks of work in the same spots has really improved efficiency, which we're now tracking. And we're planning out work months in advance in a way that we were unable to in the past. We have enough crew time to allocate a crew to address emergencies and schedule them to treat parks months in advance. So we're able to plan out when to prune London plane trees, which are horrible to work on when they're leafed out, in the months when they're not leafed out. So our crew doesn't suffer allergies from the duff under the leaves, for example. Also, we are able to avoid driving on turf and damaging other park assets or interfering with school activities by that forward planning. So thank you all for your attention. We're happy to take questions. Last slide is a question slide. I'm really excited about the program. I think it's going well so far. Yeah. Back to the chair. Thank you.
Any question? Thank you. Any questions? Thoughts?
Structural training of young trees, is that part of the maintenance plan or not?
Yes, so the first, I want to say 3 years of the trees that we plant in parks get structurally pruned by the planting coordinator and the team that they work with. And once it's beyond that 3 years, part of the routine inspection in the parks is looking at structural pruning needs of trees of all ages. So any structural pruning needs to be done, we're including that in there. And I think you'll be happy to hear that we've already done a lot.
Also part of that, it's 3 years of watering and looking at these new trees, which is a year increase from what used to be 2, but it's less than 5. And I'm wondering if you're looking at, given, shall we say, the challenges of summers, if there's consideration of lengthening that to 5. I know that's more labor, but I don't know if you have data on what's your survival rate.
Yes, we do, Commissioner Nelson. And that is captured in the online report, the planting report that we've had running for a few years now. We'll give you an update soon, but we are monitoring the success or not success of all the trees that we plant and establish, and adjusting and adapting our programs accordingly when needed. That is one we're tracking carefully.
Okay, thank you.
Like, for example, this year with little additional costs, we're providing more mulch for the recently planted trees to kind of retain that water. So yeah, lots of steps to take.
Thank you.
Commissioner Jordan.
Yeah, thanks for that presentation. Very exciting work, and looking forward to see it evolve. Could you say a little more? You mentioned dealing with trees to improve wildlife habitat a couple of times. I'm curious what that kind of approaches you're using for that, and also if you are employing or considering kind of a snag or deadwood management program. Some time ago, the city, I think it was Environmental Services, put together a whole manual on the role of deadwood and snags. And Brian French, who used to be on this commission, is very engaged in that. And I see snags around town. We have some in our yard, and I've seen some along streets and maybe in parks that look like they're there on purpose. So I was curious about that.
I'm gonna start with the first part of your question. So part of what the new program and funding is helping is allowing us more time to go back and check on snags. Test the stability of them, reduce them if we need to. And historically, because we lacked some of the structure to be able to monitor them, we were much more hesitant to create them or leave them in places that there was much potential for failure and potential harm to anybody or building. So part of what we're doing is being more open to habitat snags because we can maintain them better than we used to be able to. Another part of what we're doing is creating a guide for when and where and how we would like to leave them so that that guide can be modified and reviewed and have input from everyone and shared with anyone who's involved in the decision for if we leave a snag. Because it's not always just me, our tree inspectors still write a lot of work orders, so getting us all on the same page is a huge portion of that. Another piece is that we're working towards being able to have them all mapped so that we know where they are and we have an inspection record of them. That's in progress. And another thing that's in progress is designing a small sign that could be attached to them so that any park user or park staff, when they go past a dead remaining tree, is very clear that it has been there, left there intentionally. Sometimes what we run into when we have multiple opportunities for review of a tree, it may be left intentionally by a couple of decision makers, and then a couple of different people come in and decide to remove it, not knowing it was there on purpose. And one other, several other things we're working on, scheduling work outside of bird nesting windows a bit more intentionally so that we don't have the direct impacts of our work on nesting birds is a major factor. And and we're getting more involved with the biologist with BES who's able to come survey areas before we do work, and we've had additional training with our crews on recognizing the wildlife in trees that they're working on so that we can pull off and reschedule to protect them.
I am so glad to hear you say that. That is really, really good news. Have you seen the manual on avoiding impact to nest during nesting season? There's a good manual that I believe Dave Helzer put together.
Yes, I actually took a class from Dave Helzer when he was introducing that manual. So I've taken his class and I've read the manual and I have the manual, and I stay in close contact with Jade at BES who helps with the bird surveys, and I do know Brian French and Ryan Gilpin who teach the wildlife tree care for wildlife, or I don't remember what they actually call the class, but I've taken a couple of their classes as well.
That's great. Thanks. Very good.
The plus is our crews generally like trees and birds, and so we're thrilled when we can avoid impacting them negatively.
Yes.
Cool. Great presentation. We're essentially out of time. I did have a question, but I'm wondering if we could maybe put it into another future presentation agenda item, and that is the direction of the tree. So you showed increased tree planting in parks, right? But how does that relate to the actual canopy? Is it just replacement? What's the goal on the canopy in parks? And how are we gonna track that? And where's it going? How do you decide, all that?
Great questions that our urban forest plan update, the Portland Urban Forest Plan will
Look at
get at.
Yeah, okay.
But in general, we
Bigger.
start with
Yeah.
replacement of trees that have had to be removed or failed as per code. And we are building into more than replacement in parks. We've done some of that already, and that's the increase that Paul is talking about that you saw on that slide. It's part of that. It's also partly that we were behind in
Right.
replacing because we did not have the resources we now have through the levy.
Cool. Okay, to be continued. Great. I want to preserve time for Commissioner Nelson for the next agenda item on the policy committee.
Okay, hi, this is Bruce Nelson. I'm co-chair of the policy
Sorry,
committee.
just a second, Bruce. Could we save a few minutes at the end? Leah was gonna give an update on the budget advisory committee work as well. So if we could just save 2-3 minutes before the end of the meeting.
Sure.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, policy committee, Roberta and I co-chair that committee. Megan, technically, excuse me, it's a subcommittee. Megan is also on the subcommittee. We currently have one member of the public who attends fairly regularly, and that's about it. The people who attend regularly has been declining over the past few years. And we're trying to get some bylaws for the subcommittee, which is one of the stipulations from Civic Life or whatever they're called currently. So those are in a draft form. There's still being some revisions. They'll come to you when they are ready. And I personally would like to try to get more people on that subcommittee, but right now, it looks like subcommittees, the only, according to the Urban Forestry Commission bylaws, only members of UFC that are on a subcommittee have voting privileges or rights. So just need to work out the details of how the subcommittee works before we can go and reach out and try to get members of the community that would regularly attend. It's a small enough group that there's actually a chance for discussion. And so I view it personally as a way for people to become acquainted with what the Urban Forestry Commission does and urban forestry, and could be a good training ground for potential members in the future of the Urban Forestry Commission. But we need to work out what are the ground rules for the group. Typically what we do is there's some item that comes before UFC, we discuss it. We don't have time to write the letter, and the policy committee is directed to write the letter. They write the letter as a draft that goes to the chairs of Urban Forestry Commission, and then they send it on to city council, something like that usually. But so the policy committee has been around for quite a long time. There have been committees of the Urban Forestry Commission. The predecessor of the Urban Forestry Commission was this Street Tree Committee or something like that, STAC. Street Tree Advisory Committee back in the mid-70s. They had committees that they formed, and so that tradition has continued for a very, very long time. For the last 8 years or so, the policy committee has mainly had non-members of UFC on it. It was very active in the rewrite of Title 11 in getting information. So we're just trying to get our ducks in order, get some bylaws, and then hopefully we'll get some new people who at least attend the meetings regularly. So that's all I have to say.
Bruce?
Yes.
Adrian, yeah, I mean, I elaborate just like for a minute. At the last meeting, Megan Vandermark, Bruce Nelson, I, and our other members talked about bringing a presentation to the full Forestry Commission, perhaps early next year, maybe February, on the policy committee, what we do, what we've accomplished over the past years, kind of what we do, what we don't do, how it works, and in partly to help encourage some of you to participate with the committee, either as members or being able to drop in on issues that you're interested in. So removing any barriers to any, feeling like you have to be an expert or answering questions about time commitments and so forth. So we'd really like to have more engagement from the UFC members, either on an ad hoc or on a kind of a more regular basis. The other thing we talked about at our last meeting, and it was in response to Commissioner Clapp's suggestion, is we really would like to work with the staff and commission to have a discussion with you all about the length of our meetings, that we, as Bruce alluded to, that we often don't have time to do a deeper dive. And these commission meetings used to be 4 hours long. They're not anymore, maybe blessedly, but we'd like to talk about how we can be as effective as possible as a full commission, maybe in conjunction with our subcommittees. So we're trying to figure out how to, orchestrate those discussions, working with Co-Chair Feldstein and the staff, and hope to bring that to you over the next months. So, thanks.
Sounds great. Bruce. Excellent. Yeah. We'll look forward to hearing more about that. So we're gonna move on to.
Leah has a quick update for us.
Hi, everyone. So Megan and I attended the first budget advisory committee meeting for Portland Parks and Rec. And it was good to hear Todd's presentation about the levy, because basically what they said was, without the levy, we're in trouble. So I'm glad to hear that voters seem to be positive about it. The main thing was they were just kind of laying out the groundwork of some of the budgetary challenges that they're kind of forecasting for. Big ones are just probably nothing that surprises anyone here. The charter reform that the city's going through is going to cost money, and it's going to cost more in the future. So that's one thing. Filling job positions, which we're really excited that we have now with urban forestry and other areas of parks, but that obviously it takes time to staff up, and it will take more money to pay those folks. And then the push to not charge fees for services as much as possible with the parks, which I think all of us agree is really important to make it accessible to everyone, but that obviously reduces some of the revenues that they're bringing in. And then inflation, no surprise to anyone, that's a challenge. And they named labor negotiations, but I mean, that, as someone from representing labor said, I mean, we just need people who can afford to live here. And so that means paying them a livable wage, which, that's tied to inflation as well. So those are some of the long-term challenges with budget forecasts that they identified. And the assumptions they're making are that the parks levy will be extended at the same rate. So that's kind of part of their forecasting. That's one model. And then another, they're looking at no reductions in the general fund. And then they have a tax revenue model they're working with PSU on, just to see what's the future looking like with tax revenue. So the conclusions were that by 2025, the revenues will go from positive to negative. So they're going to have some work to do there. And yeah, basically, like right now there's a surplus, but they're forecasting that's going to change. So that was sort of the gist of it. I hope I got it right. Please, I know Jen was there. Correct anything that I might have misspoke about.
It was a really concise and thorough update. Thank you, Commissioner Platt.
It's great. Thanks for being there.
Yes, our next meeting is, I believe it's February 11th. So more updates to come.
Excellent. Well, we've come to the end of our time. And thanks everyone for participating today, and we'll see you all next month.
Here.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Thank you all. Take
Bye-bye.
care.
Thank
Happy
you.
holidays.
Happy holidays, happy new year. Be safe.
Happy solstice.
Happy solstice.
Happy solstice.
Longer days ahead.
Yes.
Every day.
Yay.